The sun sat low above the trees, casting long shadows across the narrow path. Where the girl walked with her German shepherd, the dog was large, but gentle, its thick coat golden brown, and its pace calm and steady. Beside her the park was mostly empty, save for the occasional jogger and a mother pushing a stroller, and the only sound was the quiet crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The girl looked no older than 10, wearing a sky blue hoodie a bit too big for her, and a pair of worn sneakers that kicked up tiny bits of gravel. As she moved, her hand was small, but firm on the red leash, the kind made for strong dogs. Though she hardly needed it, the shepherd was trained and loyal, and had never once given her reason to be afraid. They had been walking this route for weeks, maybe months, ever since her mother said it was important to get outside to move, to breathe, and so each afternoon after school and a snack she would clip on the leash, put on her hoodie, and head to the park with her companion who never left her side. The dog was a gift from her late grandfather, a retired officer who said every girl should have a protector with 4 legs and a noble heart, and that's what this dog was: noble, calm, and protective, with a quiet strength in the way it watched everything around them. She often talked to the dog on these walks, not loudly, just soft little comments like, "Do you think squirrels have families?" or maybe, "One day I'll bring you a hot dog from the food truck near the tennis courts." The dog would never reply, but its ears would twitch and its tail would wag slowly, as if answering in a language only they understood. Sometimes she imagined they were in a movie or a storybook with just the two of them on a secret adventure, and today felt like one of those days. The air was crisp, the light golden, and she was just beginning to hum when it happened. A man was sitting on a bench near the duck pond, hunched over, staring at the ground. At first she didn't think much of him until he rose suddenly without any warning and stepped into their path. She slowed, the dog slowed too, and they both looked up at the man as he stared at the shepherd with a strange expression. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes tired, and the way he moved was uneven, like he hadn't decided what he was going to do until the moment he did it. And then, without a single word, he lifted his leg and kicked the dog hard right in the side. The blow was fast and sharp. The sound of it rang in her ears more than the dog's yelp did. The shepherd stumbled backward, catching itself with its paws, but clearly shaken and confused she stumbled too, yanked forward by the leash, then falling to her knees, her hands scraping the gravel. But all she could do was stare, wide-eyed, mouth open, unable to move, as her best friend cried out beside her. She stayed on the ground for a moment, her hands stinging from the fall, but she barely noticed, because all she could see was the German shepherd trying to rise, trying to understand why someone had hurt it when it had done nothing wrong. The dog looked at her, ears low, eyes wide and full of confusion and pain, not just from the kick, but from the betrayal of a world it had only known as kind and safe. The girl pulled herself up slowly, her knees shaky, her breath shallow. The man was still standing there, his face blank, like he had just done something meaningless, something no more important than brushing dirt off his pants. She looked around, then hoping someone would step in, hoping an adult would rush over or at least call out, but all she saw were frozen faces, distant eyes, people unsure whether to get involved or stay out of it. A jogger had stopped mid-stride, a couple nearby had turned their heads, and even the woman with the stroller had slowed, but no one moved, not yet. Not one single person, and in that long, terrible pause the world felt completely silent except for the soft whimper coming from the shepherd's throat. The man glanced at the people watching as if expecting someone to speak up or maybe daring them to do so, but then his eyes returned to the girl and the dog, and for a second she thought he might say something or walk away, but instead he just stood there like a statue, waiting for a reaction, like he was testing something or someone, and it was in that moment that something inside the girl snapped, not in anger, not in fear, but in clarity. She saw that no one else was going to act, no one else was going to say the words that needed to be said, so it would have to be her, even if her voice was small, even if her knees still shook, even if her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear herself think. She took a step toward the man, then another, her fingers tightening on the leash, the dog beside her slowly rising to its feet as if drawing strength from her, or maybe giving it to her. The two of them stood side by side, the girl and her wounded companion, and she looked up at the man, her chin lifted and her voice loud enough to carry across the grass and the trees and into the ears of everyone who had pretended not to see. "You don't get to hurt him and walk away like nothing happened," she said, her voice clear and rising. "You don't get to touch someone you don't even know just because you feel like it. He is my best friend. And he saved my life once when a man tried to grab me near the school. He put himself between me and danger, and now I am doing the same for him." She didn't yell, she didn't cry, but something about the way she stood, the way she spoke, made everyone look at her, not just see her, but really see her, and suddenly everything felt very, very still. The air felt heavy as she stood there, her eyes locked on the man who had kicked her dog, her shoulders trembling, but her stance unshaken. The German shepherd stood close to her, its side pressed gently against her leg, still hurting but alert as If it too understood that something important was happening, the man looked at her with a mixture of surprise and confusion, as if he had not expected a child to confront him like this, to speak like that, to challenge him in front of everyone, and yet she had, and now the silence that followed seemed to press down on the entire park. A few more people had stopped, now drawn in by the tension in the air. Some were whispering, others recording on their phones, and a woman nearby took a cautious step forward but stopped when the girl raised her hand, not to silence anyone, but just as a signal that she was not done. She still had more to say, and she would not be rushed or interrupted. "You don't know what this dog means to me," she continued, her voice steady, now stronger than before. "You don't know how he stayed by my side when I was scared, when my mom had to work 2 jobs and I had no one to talk to. You don't know how he kept me warm during that storm when the power went out and I cried in the dark because I thought no one would come. You don't know any of that because you never asked and you never cared." The man shifted uncomfortably, now his confidence cracking just a little as the eyes of the crowd pressed in on him like a weight he had not anticipated. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again and took a small step back, maybe thinking it was enough to end the moment, to disappear and pretend nothing had happened. But the girl was not finished. She took a breath and kept going. "When you hurt him, you hurt me," she said. "You hurt a friend who would never hurt anyone, and I think people should know what that says about you. Maybe they should remember your face when they see you in this park. Maybe they should ask themselves why you did it, because you didn't do it out of fear or by accident. You did it on purpose, and I think the world should know what that looks like." There was a long pause after that, her words hanging in the air, heavy and unblinking. And for a moment even the birds seemed to fall silent. The man looked around at the faces surrounding him, now no longer passive, no longer unsure, but firm, watching, judging, and holding him accountable in a way that made him lower his eyes and mutter something no one could hear before turning and walking away faster, now his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders hunched like he wanted to disappear into the wind. The girl didn't move. She waited until he was gone, until she could no longer see him, and then slowly she turned to the dog, knelt beside him, and placed a hand gently on his head, and only then did her voice soften again as she whispered, "I got you too, just like you always got me." The girl stayed kneeling for a while, her fingers resting on the German shepherd's thick fur, her breathing still uneven, but her mind slowly settling as people around her began to stir again. Voices returned, murmurs spread, some hushed and uncertain, others louder, full of praise and awe. The woman with the stroller finally stepped forward, bending down to ask if the dog was all right, offering to call a vet or a friend or anyone the girl might need, but the girl just shook her head gently and smiled. The kind of smile that says thank you without needing to speak. The crowd was shifting now. More people were coming over. A man with a bright green jacket asked if she was okay, and someone else offered water for the dog, and someone else still asked what had just happened, and she answered every question clearly, calmly, like someone far older than she looked, like someone who had been forced to grow up a little faster than the world had intended. She told them what the man did, how the dog reacted, how she felt something inside her tell her she had to speak, and how no one else had moved until after the words had already left her mouth. She stood again, slowly brushing the dirt from her knees and checking the leash and collar, and the dog looked up at her with those loyal, tired eyes, as if asking, "Are we okay now?" And she gave a small nod that meant yes, "We are," and they began walking again, but this time they were not alone, not really, because 2 people followed behind, quietly keeping watch. And another pair walked ahead just far enough to make room, and others stood watching as if unwilling to turn away from a child who had reminded them what courage looked like. Someone recorded her final words and uploaded them. By nightfall the clip had reached thousands and then tens of thousands, and by morning it was on every platform with captions like "Brave girl defends her dog" and "Child stands up to animal cruelty," and within hours her name was trending, though she never once said it out loud in the video. And even now, as interview requests started flooding into her mother's inbox and reporters showed up at her school asking for a quote or a photo, she kept saying the same thing over and over again: "I said what needed to be said. And that was enough." She never planned to go viral, never wanted to be famous or noticed, but something about her voice that day, something about the way she stood alone but unafraid, struck something deep in people who watched and listened and saw themselves in her. Maybe it was the way she spoke without shouting, or the way she protected what mattered, or maybe it was just because for once someone small and quiet and unimportant in the eyes of the world had said the right thing at the right time and reminded everyone that strength has nothing to do with size. And through it all she stayed the same, walking her dog every day at the same time in the same park, hoodie pulled over her head, leash in hand, protector and protected, side by side, just like before. The next few days felt different, though. She tried to keep everything the same hoodie, same path, same quiet conversations with her dog as they walked through the park, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, eyes followed her more closely. Strangers smiled, nodded, even clapped softly when she passed. Some came up to say thank you or tell her she was brave or ask if they could pet the dog. She never said much back, just nodded and let them kneel beside him, let them see that he was still gentle, still kind, still trusting even after what had been done to him. But not everyone reacted that way. Some looked uncomfortable, some turned away quickly, some whispered like she had done something wrong by speaking up, by becoming something more then quiet and invisible. And one morning, near the far end of the park, a boy from her school, someone who barely spoke to her during class, pointed and laughed, saying, "Hey, there's the dog girl. Did you bring your knight in furry armor again?" She didn't answer, just kept walking, head high, leash steady, heart thumping harder than she wanted it to. Her mother had started getting calls, emails, even letters from people she didn't know, some praising the girl, some offering money to help with training or medical care, others asking for interviews, TV shows, podcast appearances, even a book deal. Her mother had cried after reading one message from a woman who said her daughter watched the video and finally found the courage to report her own bullying. The girl didn't understand why anyone wanted to hear more. She had just done what she thought anyone would do even if they hadn't, and she didn't want to be a symbol or a story. She just wanted her dog to stop flinching. Every time a stranger got too close at night, the girl would lie awake, her dog curled up beside her, breathing slow and warm and steady, and she would stare at the ceiling and wonder if she had really changed anything or if people would forget and go back to silence the next time someone got hurt. And sometimes she would feel proud and strong, like she had made the world a little better, but other times she would feel so small again, so tired of being noticed, when all she ever wanted was to walk in peace with her best friend. But even in those quiet moments, when doubt crept in, she would remember the way her voice had sounded in the air, the way people had listened, the way the man had walked away and never returned to that park, and most of all, she would remember the feeling of her dog pressing against her leg, not afraid, not angry, just there, always there. And she knew that no matter what came next, she would never regret speaking, because silence had never protected anyone, and that day her voice had mattered. Days turned into a week, and then 2, and still people kept talking about the girl and the dog and the video that had made them both symbols of something bigger than just one moment in one park. The video had been shared by celebrities, reposted by animal rights groups, and even used in a school assembly in another state to teach kids about standing up for what is right. And every time her mother showed her a new message or read her a kind comment, the girl would smile, politely nod, and then go back to brushing the German Shepherd's fur or reading quietly in her room, as if all the noise in the world could never mean more to her than the soft rhythm of her dog's breathing. One afternoon, after school, she came home to find a letter on the table, not an email, not a comment, not a typed note, but a handwritten letter with thick, careful penmanship and no return address. Her mother said it came in the mail that morning, and she opened it slowly, half curious, half unsure of what kind of words might be waiting inside, and what she read made her sit down in silence, the dog curled up beside her as always, as she held the paper in both hands and read every word twice. The letter was from a man who said he had been in the park that day. He said he was the jogger who had stopped but done nothing, who had frozen, who had felt shame and regret so heavy that it followed him home and sat in his chest for days, until he saw the video and realized just how much her courage had affected him. He wrote that her voice had woken something in him, something he thought had been lost, and that because of her he had reported a coworker for harming his dog, and for the first time in years felt like he had done something right. She folded the letter, slowly placed it in the box with the others, the kind words, the thank yous, the messages that somehow felt too big for her to carry, but too precious to throw away. And she leaned back against the couch, thinking not about the fame or the views or the interviews, but about how one voice had reached a stranger and turned hesitation into action. And in that moment she felt the smallest flicker of peace return to her chest. The next day she walked the same path again, same leash, same hoodie, same gentle wind brushing her cheeks, and something felt lighter, not just in the air, but in her own heart. She stopped near the pond where it had all happened, where silence had once felt like a cage, and she looked at the bench, now empty and still. And she reached down to scratch behind her dog's ear and said softly, like a secret, maybe we were supposed to be here that day, maybe it happened so we could help more than just ourselves. And the dog wagged his tail gently, looking up at her with eyes full of love and loyalty and something that felt like understanding. And in that moment neither of them needed words to know they were exactly where they were meant to be. The morning was quiet and gray, a light mist resting over the park paths as the girl walked slowly beside her dog, the leash loose between them, her eyes calm but alert, her body moving with the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from having faced fear and spoken anyway. And though the days had passed and the moment had faded from most people's thoughts, she still carried it inside her, not like a wound, but like a weight that had made her stronger, the kind of strength that doesn't show in muscles or loud voices, but in the way a person chooses to stand when they could just as easily sit down. By now the video had reached millions. People from different countries had translated her words, posted them with subtitles, made artwork and shared stories of their own moments of silence and regret and courage, and even though she had never asked for any of it, her name had become something people associated with strength, with kindness, with bravery, and yet none of that ever changed. The way she looked at her dog, who remained to her not a symbol, not a viral hero, but her best friend, her protector, her quiet shadow. One afternoon, they were walking past the playground, when a group of kids ran up to her holding a phone showing her a drawing someone had made of her and the German Shepherd standing side by side beneath the word guardians, and they asked if she really said those things, if it was true, if the dog really saved her life once, and she nodded and told them yes, but I saved him too, and that made the kids go quiet for a moment before one of them said, I want to be like you when I grow up. She smiled at them, gently told them they didn't need to grow up to do what was right, that anyone any age could choose to care, could choose to speak, and the kids nodded and ran off again, playing, chasing, laughing, and she stood there watching them for a moment, thinking about how strange and beautiful it was that something painful had turned into something so full of light. Later that evening, her mother told her that a local news station wanted to name her the Community Hero of the Year and asked if she would accept the award and maybe say a few words, and the girl thought for a while, then said, I don't want an award, I just want people to remember that hurting someone weak is never strong and helping someone hurt is never small. And her mother didn't press her after that, just hugged her tightly and whispered, I'm proud of you, and the girl hugged her back, then went to find her dog, who was already waiting by the door, tail wagging, ready for their walk like he always was. And as they walked through the fading light of day, their shadows long against the grass and the wind soft through the trees, the girl looked down at him and said, maybe we didn't change the whole world, but maybe we changed someone's world, and that's enough for me. The seasons began to shift, the sharp cold of winter melting into the gentle warmth of spring, and the park where the girl and her German Shepherd had faced a moment that changed everything came alive again with the songs of birds and the fresh green of new leaves, and though the world around them moved forward, the memory of that day lingered like a quiet shadow, not dark, but soft, like a reminder of how one small voice can ripple outward beyond the edges of a single moment. The girl walked slowly along the familiar path, her fingers brushing the leash, and the dog walking faithfully beside her, his steps steady, strong despite the fading ache from the past. And as they passed the bench where the man had kicked him, she looked down at the dog, who glanced back with eyes full of trust and loyalty, the kind of trust that can only be earned through patience and love, not fear and pain. She thought about all the stories she had heard since the video went viral, stories from strangers who found courage to stand up for what was right, stories of animals rescued and cared for, stories of people learning to speak kindness even when it was hard. And though she had never asked for any praise or recognition, she knew that somehow her quiet words had helped light a path for others to follow, and in that thought she found a gentle pride, the kind that does not boast or shout, but rests quietly like a flame burning steady in the night. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail with a small invitation inside, an invitation to visit a local animal shelter, to meet other dogs and children who had been inspired by her bravery and kindness. And she thought about it for a long time, unsure if she wanted to step into a new spotlight again, but then she looked down at her dog and saw the way his tail wagged, and she knew that whatever happened next, she would keep walking forward with him by her side, because together they had already changed more than just a single day. The day she visited the shelter was filled with new faces and warm smiles and stories shared quietly over cups of hot chocolate and soft blankets for scared dogs finding their way, and kids who were learning that they could make a difference no matter how small or young they were. And as she listened and spoke, she realized that her story was no longer just hers, it was a thread woven into something much bigger, a community, a movement, a promise that cruelty would not be ignored and kindness would always be heard. When she returned home that evening, the sky was painted with pink and orange, and the dog curled up close beside her as she whispered softly into the growing dark, thank you for being my friend and for helping me find my voice. And in that quiet moment, neither of them needed words to know that they had both been saved in ways they never could have imagined. And though the world would keep turning and new stories would rise and fall, the story of the girl and her German Shepherd stood as a reminder that even in the smallest acts of courage, the power to change the world can be found in the hearts of those who dare to speak.